To the Always in Pursuit podcast. My name is Aaron, and I just want to welcome you all here. We have an exciting conversation today, and we're going to just jump right into it. Joining us, as always, is Megan.
Good morning, everyone.
And Pastor Mark.
Megan, you have to change your name to have some sort of cool little nickname like me and Aaron have. Aaron Boomtown Lynch.
That's right.
And mine, which if you don't know how to do, mine's M.A. That's my rapper name.
Are we going to tell the stories behind the nicknames?
No, but see the E-M-A-Y-E.
I know, it's ridiculous.
You say it, was that phonetically? I don't know anything about
Phonetic, yeah.
So, listen.
It's just the fun way to do
I was told there would be no English.
Yeah. So Mark, just to keep us on track, last week's message, can you give us a little recap?
Yes. Okay. So Peter and John come out of being held by the Sanhedrin, or the council. They don't give you exactly who's on the council, but you assume it's the same people that, stuck it to Jesus, basically. I mean, they do mention a few of them, and they are the same people, but it's funny that they're all loving working together.
Yeah.
It'd be like if there was a villain, a heel in, our culture who brought somehow Republicans and Democrats together. Like, how in the world could we do that? That's essentially what we're talking about. Like, the church was bringing these religious factions into one room so that they could figure out how to deal with the church all together.
When we talk about factions and councils, I just think of Survivor or The Voice or something like that.
They use their immunity whatever poll or whatever. I don't know anything about those shows, but and of course councils don't work well, right? So they get together and they just argue about what to do, and they finally just go, well, stop, don't talk about Jesus anymore. And they're like, no, we're gonna do it. If you let us go, we're just gonna keep doing it.
Yeah.
And they finally just go, no, and then they let them go. And the first thing they do is they go back to their community. They tell the story. Everybody gets pumped. It's a testimony, right? God's goodness. Testimonies are amazing. And everybody gets super excited and encouraged, and they pray. And the prayer is really the main piece of what we talked about. And then it kind of went into another little tag at the end, which I didn't really spend tons of time going through, which will actually feed into next week really significantly as we talk about Ananias and Sapphira.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. That's a tough one.
So if this is the first time you're joining us, the purpose of these podcasts are to supplement all of our sermons throughout this series Here for Good that we do on the weekends, just because a lot of these conversations are big and there's a lot of different rabbit holes. And so oftentimes you're not able to get to all of the things you want to get to in the sermon. You have a lot of notes, or there's just some things that are better unpacked in a group discussion like this. And so that's why we're doing this. We also want to get questions from you all. If you are listening out there, whether it's live while we're streaming or later, you can always email those, text it to a staff person. We would love to get questions. And
or in the chat if you're here right now.
In the chat right now. Yeah. Yep. We would love to be able to do some of those.
So the overall idea was just that you can borrow boldness, because they pray not to get back at the council, not to impede what they're doing, not to somehow avoid any more persecution. They pray for boldness to preach in the face of it all, which I think is a really interesting concept, because I talked about a little bit in the sermon. My prayer would have been boils for them and a clear takeoff, for us as a church. You have to also run the numbers. This is starting to get really threatening, because there's 3,000 that are added to their number on day one. And then there's 2,000. And by the way, these are counts of men. So, what is that? 20,000? If you add in women and children, full families, it's getting to be
a movement.
Yeah. A significant amount of people that is threatening to the people who are in charge. They're also going, 20,000 people that won't be giving to the temple. They'll be giving to their own community. Oh, there's 20,000 people now who we don't have influence over.
Yeah.
There's 20,000 people to start a riot.
Yeah.
So they're getting really intensely nervous about it.
I think there's a lot of nervousness, anxiety, fear on the council's part and the religious leaders, just because, really what was behind the arrest of Jesus and then his eventual, persecution and death was they didn't want to upset the Romans. They didn't want to create political unrest and social unrest in a way that
Mhm.
would cause the Romans to come in and kill everybody,
Yep.
like tear it all down. There was this really delicate balance of Roman occupation, but they were also allowing the Israelites, the Jews, to kind of do their own thing. And as long as they stayed in line and they didn't make too much noise, everything was great. But Jesus, in their eyes, was an agitator and, had a loud voice and was starting a movement on his own. And so post that, whatever on the timeline we are now, weeks after Jesus' death and resurrection, they don't want, 2.0 of that to happen again.
Right. Gamaliel, who's a famous rabbi, he actually says as much in the speech he gives in Acts chapter 6 before they let him go the third time. Third time. Yeah. Whatever. Second or third time. It's like hard to even keep track, but they just it depends on what you think. Like they put him in jail, then they escape from jail and start preaching. Then they pick him up again and they release him a third time. So he says as much. He goes, look, there was a movement a couple years ago. There was this guy, Judas. We got behind, people got behind him. He was a Messiah. That led to some serious persecution from Rome. And here's the thing, guys, if God is in this, we can't stop it. And if he's not in this, then it'll go away like Judas went away. Like it'll get crushed and that'll be the end of it. So there are some people in that council who are like open to the idea that maybe God is doing something different, and that if they come against it, they'll be the ones in the chapters of history that were the ones that tried to squash the real thing.
Yeah.
And he persuades the entire council just to flog them and release them. All right. It's actually later on where Saul shows up, where they just start really persecuting everybody.
Yeah. And Saul eventually becomes the perfect example of what you're talking about. Someone who, through miraculous encounter with Jesus, realizes like, I'm on the wrong side of this,
right,
and I need to switch. And,
so,
he becomes the greatest force for the church.
Yeah. And so
Jesus.
The main point is there's unbelievable boldness. What they pray for is not like self-serving at all. And my point was, you have to have a personal faith. I spent a lot of time talking about that in the sermon. You got to have personal faith. Like you can't live vicariously through someone else for your faith. You just can't do it. Like you have to have your own personal faith. There's a lot of religious systems out there, even Christian religious systems, if I can call them that, that'll go, yeah, you're saved through your family, or it's good enough for you to just be here at church. And we're not from that stream. We would say, if you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, it don't matter who in your family's saved or not saved. Like you're on your own. This is your decision to make, and it's your call. But there are things you can borrow from your community. Like I do think there are things that, like boldness is one of those. Faith sometimes, when you have people pray for you or whatever, like, like I think your community can come around you and provide you extra support when it comes to places that you might struggle. So that was kind of one of the main ideas, was that you can borrow these things from other people in your community.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
major
point there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are times that this has come into play for me. I would not say I'm the most bold person naturally.
You're growing.
I'm getting there.
You're growing.
But I remember a mission trip that Mark and I led in Mexico, where we were putting on this youth event, and we partnered up our kids with some Mexican nationals, and we sent them out in pairs of 3. And there was like one of our kids, one of their kids, and an interpreter. And we sent them out to hand out flyers and invite people to this event.
By the way, we were being good leaders. We were making sure all our students got into great groups that made sense.
We're like pairing people up, sending them out.
Focused on all them.
And then at the end, it's just Mark and I left. And I was like, all right, well, now we have an hour of just like downtime before the kids come back. And Mark was like, no, let's go. We've got a stack of invites. Let's go.
Right.
And I was like, Mark, I don't have enough Spanish for this. Like,
we didn't have an interpreter.
There was nobody left from the church. Yeah. They had run out of their people.
And you had the best Spanish on the team, but it wasn't great. It was like,
correct.
You could understand.
Like conversational Spanish.
Yeah.
But when I like had the words to invite someone to this.
Yeah. But
when they turn around and like ask questions, I wasn't confident that I could accurately answer those questions.
Sure.
And I'm an introvert who doesn't like talking to strangers. But Mark is excited. He's an extrovert. He's like he loves strangers, and he just wanted to go. And so one of the missionaries we worked with like walked us to a neighborhood and was like, here, just go down this street. Here's the invite.
Stuggery Watts.
You know the words, just like do your best. And the entire time we're walking there, I was just hating it. And I was like, this is awful. This is going to be terrible. We're going to say something wrong. We're going to offend somebody. And Mark is just like a little kid heading to a carnival. Like he's so excited.
It was kind of a down and out neighborhood too. I don't,
Yeah, it was not.
it was,
It was not the
intimidating.
suburbs.
No.
For sure.
And I was just kind of like, let's go.
So we're walking down, and Mark would go up and use his 3 sentences that he had memorized to invite somebody, hand them the invite, and then they'd turn around and like ask a question.
Pardon, invitación para ti. Los conciertos de jóvenes Iglesias de Cristos. And then I'd hand them the thing. Like it was essentially me.
Yeah. Those are all the words. They're not in the correct order, but people got the gist of what he was saying.
Mi nombre, Mark.
And then they'd turn around and ask a question, and Mark would just immediately look at me and be like, oh, okay, what'd they ask?
Right.
And they'd be asking like where the church was, how to get there. And I have no idea how to answer them. And we're just like pointing in a direction. Like,
You're like,
it's over there.
Go for it. So it's that way.
Was
It'll
it
be
like
great.
you're like, see? Like-
No, I didn't fake it as well. I was like, well, here's the questions I know how to answer. But I had to borrow boldness from Mark in that so that we could actually get that done.
It was funny because they would answer, and then I was done. That was everything I had.
You're like, those are my 3
And
sentences.
Megan could understand like 60 to 70% of what they were saying. So she would start to like understand what they were asking or saying.
Yep.
And then she would tell me, and I would act out the rest. Like I would
She
act
would,
out
like-
the answer.
Yep, charades.
And maybe throw like one word in there. I'd be like, Coche? A key. Está that direction, like
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. It was like kind of a fun moment. I actually love it when I get to be on mission trips and push the leaders a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I think they think like, oh, this is for the kids and I'm here to serve them. And then we can kind of sit back and I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to that hour of downtime before the kids came back.
That is definitely the camp that I would be in with you, Megan.
It's not gonna
I would hate Mark on the mission trip. You'd be like, all right, let's go do this extra thing that we don't need to do. And I'd be like, dude,
we needed to
we
do it.
just got rid of the kids. Give me a half hour.
This was
Like,
a beautiful
Yeah.
cultural exchange, by the way. And
Sure.
if you've never been to Mexico, the interior of Mexico, like real Mexico, you should totally go.
Yes.
Because the people there they like invite you in and they try
They're
to give
fantastic.
you like
They're
do,
very relational.
do not compliment anything in their home because they'll try to send you like they're you didn't know them 5 minutes ago and now you're sitting in their kitchen enjoying like some
Yeah.
sort of thing you've never had before. There's all these weird drinks and and sweets and
But yeah, compliment like an artwork or something on the wall.
They try to give it to you.
Come down, it's
Yep.
it's yours.
Yeah.
they're like, you like that? Oh, here you go, take it home.
So then like the funny thing would be like, oh, pantalones muy bueno. Like
They'd go in the next room,
Yeah.
change their pants, and they'd give you the pants. But yeah, it was a great experience. Looking back on it now, I can smile and laugh. In the moment, I maybe wasn't laughing quite as much.
yeah.
Oh.
But I wouldn't verbalize my dislike to Mark because I'm
Sure.
too much of
Yeah.
a 9.
Yeah, I remember like on Sunday listening to the sermon, and in my head I had this like mental image of going up to someone with like my hands cupped and be like, "Can I borrow some of your boldness?" And then they would like somehow like
Just
metaphysically put it in my hand so I could take it. It's not like that. It's like if you're someone who, that story is a perfect example of like you're more borrowing is a good word, but like it could be piggybacking off of Mark's boldness.
Yeah.
Like you're in proximity to it, and so therefore you're
Yeah.
sharing in that as well.
it's like energy that's just kind of like contagious
Yeah.
to those around you.
Yeah, I think another biblical example of that could be Moses and Aaron. Like Moses, when you read the story, at times comes off as like this kind of anxious weakling who's afraid to speak,
Mhm.
and that's why God paired him with his brother who was not. Aaron
Yeah.
was able to speak boldly and speak God's words.
Yeah.
And he was borrowing Aaron's boldness. So
Yeah.
my namesake. But
And hopefully Aaron was borrowing some wisdom along the way.
Well, until they got out of Egypt, then that was a little bit of a.
Yeah, and I think there's like it's interesting how much the contagiousness of like a movement makes things easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, it happens with boldness, but like I was even thinking about when we did the fair, in September, and I got to shout out my boy Mitch. If you guys know Mitch at church, this dude's just like the biggest servant I've ever met in my life, right? And Jill, as we were working on like giving out jobs, she was like, she's like, I don't know who to ask. She's like, I just need somebody to go around. I know what I'm asking. I know no one wants to do this job, but I just need somebody to go around and empty all the garbages like throughout the entire day. And then like they need to find ways to make themselves like, and our boy Mitch, the entire day went around and emptied out garbages. And this guy like just put what it means to be a servant on display. And you think about jobs like that, nobody would want to do something like that unless there's like something significant happening where you feel like you're a part of a movement, right? Like even the lowest job on the totem pole becomes important, like when you're struggling with having faith or having boldness or having whatever, it's like the movement of the contagiousness of the community like starts to give everyone something that allows them to kind of like rise out of their, their where they have faults or where they're weak, and to become strong in some of these areas that aren't strengths for them.
Well, I think this is a beautiful picture of how God created us as humans. He doesn't call any one leader to be perfect at everything. He says, here, get together as a team. You maybe don't have as much boldness. This person does. You guys can pair up. And I mean, it's not just for boldness. It's for all of leadership qualities or whatever. Like,
it's the body of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
We all play different parts.
There's just like this sense of relief, I guess, about not having to be good at everything. It's like, I don't have to focus on being good at something that is not a strength for me. I just have to find somebody else on the team who's good at that and lean into them for that.
It's good leadership.
Yeah, we keep saying leadership. It's almost like we have a leadership training coming up this Saturday, November 13th from 9 a.m. to 1.
Leadership is the watchword.
Are we working in like paid sponsorships as we go here? Like, you might have a deficiency in your leadership and need a place to grow. And, like we want to welcome you or invite you to Saturday.
Members Mark Purified Water, the taste of the next generation.
Tastes like something.
All right.
That's good water.
So, what I thought was interesting too was that, we talked through this, and then I finished with this idea of the shaking power of God, because it just stuck out to me that there's like this other like time where, okay, something is so intensely happening here that like the room is shaking. This is like akin to what happened in the upper room. This is like goes back to the cross, the ground just splitting, and then where it goes back to the tomb rolling away, which I'm pretty sure I got to give credit to Tim Keller on that somewhere along the line. I stole that idea. But this idea that like these guys are in persecution. They're not fighting the persecution. In fact, they're crazy enough that in chapter 6 it says that they were flogged and they like were so pumped about it. They're like, we are sharing in the persecution of Jesus by going through this. Like they looked at it like we're doing everything right and the church is growing and this is going perfectly because we just got destroyed by the council, and they got a smile on their face the whole time. Like, can you imagine how weird that was for the council to flog them? And they're like, this is the same like group of people that a couple chapters later are in jail all night and they're just worshiping, and the doors open up and they just like, nah, we're just gonna stay here and keep worshiping.
Yeah.
And all the prisoners are still there and the prisoners are listening to them. Like, what in the world? This is the same movement that gives Paul access to being a prisoner in Rome, and he's sharing the gospel with his like prison guards. Like, so we need to step back for a second here, and instead of inventing This is where it gets a little bit personal here. Oh, hi. Instead of inventing persecution
Yeah.
in our own lives,
Yeah.
where we want, for some reason, we think we're the ones being persecuted in this culture because of the stupid crap that, sorry, should be a little bit less, but because of the stupid stuff that we kind of create to be afraid of, or we create to make ourselves feel like we're this persecuted class of people, like, let's get off of that train and let's realize that real persecution is bodily harm. Real persecution is you lose choice in following Christ.
Yep.
Not in stupid things, but in following Jesus. You lose religious freedom. You lose choice in, in kind of living your own life, your own way. I'm not talking about when you choose something and there's a consequence that goes with it that you don't like. There were consequences that went with what they were doing that they didn't like, but they were happy to bear those consequences because those choices were important enough to them to bear those consequences. So, and if you make a decision to follow Jesus and you have a choice that you make that is like from your conscience, from the Holy Spirit inside of you, guiding you to make that decision, then whatever the price is that you pay is what you pay. Like,
they were so focused and on mission that those little things didn't matter.
Yeah.
They weren't distracted by the little things.
And they get huge. I mean, they're about to have their first martyr.
Yeah.
Right. That's going to happen. They're about to be pushed out of the city and the gospels are going to go travel all over the place. Yep. It won't be till way later that they are ever back in any kind of control or given any kind of access to lead a movement.
Yeah. The exact dates are escaping me right now, but when we read about these stories out of Acts about the church starting and the apostles and even Paul, it's kind of this like mini sweet spot for the church, because it's not long after that the persecution not only ramps up, but it gets like super, super extreme. Like the Romans for like 100 years tried to wipe Christianity off the face of the earth. Like Mark is growing his beard while we're talking.
It just feels good.
Yeah.
Don't judge me.
I'm just laughing. That is kind of like judgment. So it's like that persecution ramps up in a pretty extreme way for a long time. Yeah. And yet not only did Christianity survive, but after that, it became like the official, religion of the empire. And that's when it really spread throughout to the ends of the earth. But, you compare all of these things, whether it's being imprisoned, being flogged, becoming a martyr, having to, being kicked out of your home city and home state for the rest of your life, in many ways kind of being on the run, like for the rest of your life. Those are pretty poignant examples of like persecution, like actual persecution.
And we're not dealing with that kind of persecution.
No, I feel like when some of those voices kind of start chiming up and getting loud about persecution in this country, I wonder if there's like ever refugees or immigrants who are here from like other countries where they actually experience persecution who are like, you guys are dumb. Like,
right. Like there's some believers in China who are like, yeah, I'll switch. No problem. Like I'll trade with you, Yeah. I have a friend who started relaying or talking about the fact that he felt like that he maybe needed to be Bonhoeffer, that some of the stuff that was going on in our country right now was like akin to Nazis in World War II, and that he just couldn't, stand by and not make. And I was just like, wow, man, like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not there. I don't think that's a real thing. Nope. You know what I mean? Like, so I think sometimes we're like manufacturing persecution, and it may come. There might be a day when that comes. I think every civilization starts to break down over time, and those things might start to happen. But, the church is dealing with persecution all over the world, and they persevere, and we will too. And we don't need to create persecution. And even if real persecution does come at some point, then it's our job to, like Paul, like these guys, like the martyrs from those days, like, is to revel in the idea that we get to suffer with Jesus. Like, I know that's a crazy thought, but that is how they perceive the whole thing. And here we are, like, oh, Starbucks doesn't put Merry Christmas on their cups anymore. And, we're just, the culture is just moving away from us and we're just being persecuted. Like, no, that's not, those are not the same things. Right.
No.
And I'm picking an innocuous, version of that conversation.
Yeah.
Cause there's other ones that are not. So,
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So I just think like we need to kind of keep that in mind. And then the last thing I didn't really spend a lot of time talking about is actually, if you give me a second here, let me pull up my app. Is that little tag on that section? It's in Acts chapter 5. No, chapter 4. Come on, Mark. And what's crazy is that and we're going to talk a lot more about this week, but I feel like that sort of boldness leads to this unbelievable generosity that when you're willing to give up anything, you're willing to give up anything.
Yeah.
Right. So they're willing to give up their lives, their health, their, for them, it's this important to them.
Mm-hmm.
And, the next section is all the believers share their possessions. I'm going to actually read this. It's verse 32 in chapter 4. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed any of their possessions as their own. They shared everything they had. And people were like, socialism, communism. No, I'm going to get to this in a second here. And we're going to clarify this week. But with great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. So they were granted what they asked for with this boldness to share. God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there was no needy person among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. Okay, so just process this for a minute. People start selling their possessions to take care of the church, and you think like, okay, this is a really generous thing that someone could do to help the church, but you also have to process this in the regard that if someone accepted Jesus at that time, they were walking away from their own inheritance in their own family. Mm. They were walking away from their connection, their community, their family. A lot of times they were walking away from their family system, because now if you were going to not be a Jew, but you were going to actually be a Christ follower, your family was about to cut you off. What you had for the rest of your life, as far as your sort of retirement, the generational wealth in your family that would be passed down to you, it's gone. Mm-hmm. You now no longer have those connections with family. So the church had to become family for people. Mm-hmm. And had to take care of, when it talks about in a couple chapters here, them taking care of widows and orphans. Mm-hmm. That would have been the job of a family that the widow or orphan walked away from. Yep. That now the church was stepping in to take care of those people who had stepped away. It's almost like today, if you're a Muslim and you decide to follow Jesus, this is why it's one of the hardest groups of people to share Christ with, and we see the least amount of effectiveness. They have to leave everything. Mm-hmm. When Jesus tells a story about guy found a treasure in a field and sold everything he had and then went back and bought the field. There's an all-in factor here. Mm-hmm. And even today in, certain situations like Muslims, mm-hmm. where you got to buy the whole field and you got to walk away from everything. When Jesus says hey, you got to love Jesus more than you love your parents. You're like, that's a weird thing to say.
But I love my parents.
But in this regard, you essentially cut off they cut you off, but you essentially walk away from your whole support system. Mm-hmm. And so these people...
And walk away from everything, I mean, it was also their culture inheritance too.
Right. So yeah, everything. Mm-hmm. And so, and it's also later on in the book of Acts, where they are struggling with how Jewish do you need to be. You also need to process this conversation in that conversation. Mm-hmm. Because again, these Jews have lost so much following Jesus that there's I can see why they'd want to grasp onto something. You know what I mean? No. We lost everything, but we have to keep, and then, add in whatever spiritual practice that they want to add in, circumcision or eating kosher or whatever. And it's all that's got to go, for you to go in. So when these people are giving away, they sell a piece of land and they're giving it to the church, you have to think through the idea that they're taking care of a lot of people that they love. Mm-hmm. And from a leadership perspective or from a wealth perspective, they have it and they want to take care of the community. And so this is a generous act from these kinds of people. And it kind of reframes it, because I think a lot of people have said, like, we need to be this way for the church. We need to be generous like this. And I do think you need to be generous as a Christian. As you grow, you need to be more generous. You need to keep growing in your generosity. Like, giving to the church is part of what it means to be generous as a believer. If this is your community of people that you're taking care of, like, you should give and give generously and keep growing that. But there's something happening here where these people are saying, cool, I can give to this. I can help. I can take care of these people. This wasn't for the movement to have, this wasn't to legitimize the movement. It wasn't to set up a treasury. You know what I mean? It was to feed everybody.
They weren't doing a capital campaign.
Yes. No, it was taking care of widows and orphans in their community.
Yeah.
Like, a couple of chapters later, they actually organize themselves and they get deacons. And these people go around and actually make sure that everyone's being treated fairly and that all the orphans and widows are being taken care of. So, like, they actually get people to make sure that this money is being used properly, and they organize themselves. And if you're like if you're an administrative person, or you like love, organizing, that's your passage, that's your jam. So to me, this little tag is kind of a weird piece, but it comes off of the boldness, and you can see the pastoral feeling of the group where they feel responsible to take care of this new community. Yeah. So that was parts I couldn't get in the sermon because it would have been too long.
What?
I know. Some of that will make it into this week as well, as we talk about Ananias and Sapphira. Yeah. Don't get struck down by God. So
we could say that in general. Like, that could be one of our values moving forward. Like, don't get struck down by God.
Are we going to have podcast t-shirts that just take random statements and we just start? So don't get struck down by God is like,
whatever you're doing, don't get struck down.
Always in Pursuit podcast. Don't get struck down by God.
We have somebody like embroider us some pillows or something with just random quotes. Is there a crafty person out there? Leah Danielson?
So instead of like the like home is where the heart is, just say, don't get struck down by God.
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I don't think that was meant to be on a pillow.
It's not what you think it is.
So that's the gist of the sermon, and it kind of helps us frame the rest of the conversation or whatever. It helps us process. I don't know if any of that shook something loose in either of you, but that's kind of how I was processing the whole passage. So, yeah.
No, I think one of the really great things about all of this is that throughout this conversation, this sermon series, to be on this rescue mission to get back to what the church is about, you really got to dig deep sometimes and find some of these really basic things. And whether it's the notion of sharing and boldness, or whether it's looking at like the cultural reality of the time and what those first Christians were going through and the implications of that, and then trying to translate that into our context in modern times, all of those things are valuable. Because I think the temptation would be to just take a passage like that at face value, be like, well, God wants me to sell my house and give it to the church. Like,
maybe.
Right. And there are times where that could happen, but I think God actually cherishes shelter for you and your kids. Like, he wants you to be safe.
If you have to sell your house to give to the church, but then you now need the church to help you
get a house,
be sheltered and fed. Maybe not.
But it's more getting at the heart of what was actually going on there, and what does that mean for us today? Like, what is our version of that? And it also kind of sheds light on this notion of those first Christians were helping the other converts who were switching from being a Jew to being a Christian.
Yeah.
Now that gets a little bit more complicated, because we're not switching from Judaism to Christianity. It's more looking at people who maybe grew up in the church and walked away from it, right? Or it's people who grew up in a different tradition of Christianity, or maybe someone who has immigrated here from a different country and they're a completely different culture, right? And there's a different context there. What are the different implications, those subcontexts for each of those different people as they come to this country and interact with Christians and churches? And what does that look like, and what does that mean? And so I think each of us have to wrestle with these topics in our own way and figure out, like, what is God calling each of us to do? That's the first part. And then the second part is collectively, as we come together as the body, what does that mean for us as the church, the kingdom, but then also our individual churches as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I was thinking, my parents live in Florida. My wife's parents live in Boston. We don't have any family here.
mm-hmm.
We moved out here 10 years ago now, or 11 years ago now. And it's like, I don't know how we would have raised our kids to this age and gotten through life without having a family
Mm-hmm.
of people from our church. And I don't understand how people do that on their own when they don't have that built-in safety net. So I think of that from that perspective. The church needs to be this fam that like takes care of people,
Mm-hmm.
which I think in general our church is great at that.
Yeah.
I also think when we're talking about somebody like who could be Muslim, we got to be really holistic in what we offer to a new convert or to someone who's considering Christ. Like we have to step in now and be the support that they don't have anymore.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's I'm not sure. I was talking to a missionary who does diaspora ministries, and they were telling me that's not important. It's just scattered people. So people who are here, but like they're not in their homeland, but they're still a community of people in different places or whatever.
Yeah.
That's what diaspora means. So he was saying the amount of Muslim converts to Christianity is like non-existent. He was like, he's heard a story about one guy, and then that guy became a pastor, but then it ended in some tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's so small, the amount of people who have come here and received Christ, because the built-in safety net, the social network, the fabric is all built into that community and the religious piece of it. So it's almost like in order to reach into that community, you have to recreate all of those pieces that people need to be able to help them walk away. Like you can't just be like, this guy accepted Jesus and then, tell a testimony at church and then cool, good luck. Like there's so much that you now have to do to support that person.
100%. Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just really, I don't know. It's one of those difficult things that,
I mean, that's kind of a spot that I've come to over years of thinking and wrestling through these different topics and conversations, is this notion that like, I think one of the things that the church has done, and I'm talking about church in general, not our church or a specific church. Yeah. One of the disservices that we've done is when we think about like evangelism specifically, but also like converting someone to Christianity, we think like the pinnacle of that, the top of that mountain is getting them to come to church on a Sunday. And it's like, oh my goodness. Like in this context, that is like the first step of like 5,000, because especially if you're someone coming from a different country, different culture, or in a bigger way, like a different religion, it takes so much more because they might have their own version of what we were just talking about, walking away from their family, walking away from their inheritance, walking away from their cultural inheritance. If I were immigrating to a different country, I think one of the first things that Jess and I would probably do is like find a group of other Americans, like expatriates that we could hang out with and befriend, because we'd be able to share in our culture and language and things like that. Like it makes total sense that if someone's coming here from this country, from somewhere else, that they do the same thing, but then also realize that like, that's a huge hurdle for that person to get over to convert them to Christianity. Like that's a really, really, really big deal. And if the church or the people who make up the church are not willing or able or even understand that they need to like step in and do some of that, then it's no wonder we don't see a lot of people converting, from different countries, different cultures, different religions. So
okay. Well, I think that was me for a second.
Yeah.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay. Poor Megan. She's trying to recover from a coughing fit. So to continue the conversation we started last week, because we did get some feedback, which is kind of good. I got some people who, most of the feedback we got are people who were like, yeah, way to go. Right on. That's a great conversation to have. And I don't know. It's, I'm not excited about the conversation, but I feel like we are reading it correctly. We're trying to. And, I think as we're thinking, I don't want to say we get paid to do this, but like we're always looking at where things are going. Like, and we're probably thinking, and I especially think in the future, Like if your personality is one of those people that like think in the past or in the future, like I'm the person that thinks far ahead.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm just looking at the landscape and thinking 10 years down the road, not 2022.
Yeah.
So some of these conversations that I'm having, they might even feel a little bit premature or like they haven't fully grown into what I'm pointing at is the probable outcome. But to be honest with you, I actually think we're way behind.
Yeah.
I think people don't see it because they don't have relationships with a lot of Gen Z. And, you know, Gen Z is, I mean, essentially our millennials are like 40 right now down to, man, how old are millennials? Down to like late 20s. And then you've got essentially like college age, just out of college, down into probably like high school is our Gen Z students. And then you've got a whole nother generation they haven't even defined really yet behind them.
Yeah.
That are coming up, which I'm raising one of those. I have a 10-year-old. Yeah. So I'm in that next generation.
I really hope they come up with a better name. Like I've heard people say like TikTok.
Oh gosh.
Gen TikTok or something. I'd be like, oh, don't do that. Like,
and there's a ton we could talk about Gen Z and millennials. Because there is it's some of the trends that started with millennials are now being full born in Gen Z. But then there's also some trends that millennials and Z are that are part of their generation that are like almost like a response to baby boomers and Gen Xers.
Yeah.
Right. So they're almost like it's not like, so millennials, you know, became much more atheist or none. Right. So people that had no religious affiliation at all. Gen Z was like, hold my, you know, my Red Bull and let me show you what this really looks like. Right. So we're at a point now where Gen Z is about 4 to 8%, what we would call like a committed believer.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And you look at baby boomers, we're probably like double that. And then we're talking about committed. We're not talking about like a church Christian, like going through the motions or whatever. I'm talking about someone who has a high view of scripture, someone whose worldview is based on Jesus and the Bible, someone who, you know, probably is in some sort of community, probably serves somewhere in a church. Like, I don't really want to define that exactly, but somebody who has a really like, like, I don't want to say honest faith, but like an authentic faith, right? Their life is kind of wrapped around that their faith. That number has gone, you know, from, let's just call it 20% in baby boomers. I mean, you could find different numbers, but they're all kind of in that same version, that same kind of area, down to like 4 to 8% in Gen Z. And of course, Gen X is very similar to baby boomers, and on these numbers, they don't really go down very much. Millennials, it like drops, and Gen Z is like off a cliff.
Yeah.
And I think people think that maybe we're having a conversation about 10 years from now that like this isn't full born and that it's gonna come home to roost later. But I'm actually trying to say like it's here now. Like, and the reason we don't always feel it in the church is because we still have a whole generation of people that are authentic Christians, and we don't have Gen Z or millennials generally in the same numbers or at all. And I wouldn't say that's true about our church. I think we actually reach millennials really well. Like, it's probably the main thing we do. Like, our church makeup is probably like, 50-60% millennials, like lots and lots and lots of little kids and, young families. But I think that it's already here, and we're watching baby boomers right off into the sunset, and Gen X again has really not provided us anything helpful. They've just done more of the same crap, and
they were a lot more angsty.
Yeah. It's like they just really wanted the baby boomers' approval. That's really what it came down to. We want to be like them, it's like they're cool uncles. They want to be like their cool uncles. And so it's kind of left to us. Of course, I say that I'm 41. You could call me Gen X, or you could call me millennial. I got like 1 foot in one and 1 foot in the other, which maybe makes me like,
I think I've said this before, but I'm like 4 months into millennial.
Yeah.
So
who
I
knows?
feel more Gen X than I feel millennials.
I really think like it's 83 that
Mhm.
really begins millennial, like the generation of millennials, and that if you're in that 79 to 83 range, you just feel like you don't fit anywhere. You just a weirdo.
Your own thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they've said Zennial, but I just think that's like a, I feel like you're just confused.
We're a micro generation.
Yeah. So I'm confused, right? But at least I can be honest about both. I don't
Yeah.
feel like I have a dog in the fight.
Yeah.
But I do think that people think that, okay, so they think that this is like something that's coming, but I want to say it's already here. Like I already see a post-Christian landscape. I already see the idea that like we're not the darlings of things, and we don't set the cultural norms.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like we're still fighting for that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already lost.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's over. I actually don't think we need to now worry about trying to fight for our values and morals to be legislated, for sure not to be legislated. And secondly, to expect anyone to live up to our morals and values. And I think we need to embrace the idea that like, if we don't change and do something differently that brings in more Z, that reaches out to millennials who are, disconnected from the church and feeling like the church has left them, right? Which I think that would be the way I think a lot of people would say it. Like I didn't really change, but the church changed and left me. Or I finally got to be an adult and woke up to the idea that like this was built on a pretty shaky foundation. If we don't make those changes, then it's a clock that's ticking down. It's not a new vibrant thing that's being handed off to the next generation. And those changes bring angst in people, and people struggle with those changes. So I pulled an article. It's actually from the Gospel Coalition, which kind of blows my mind because they got something right here. If you don't know what the Gospel Coalition is, that's fine. You don't need to worry about what I just said. And it's an article that's 5 things that frustrate Gen Z Christians.
I'm biting my tongue so hard.
Sometimes, look,
I love the Gospel
listen,
Coalition.
clocks are right twice a day. Like if a broken clock is wow, clocks. If a clock's broken and it's not moving correctly or set correctly, it'll never be right all day. But if it's broken, it'll be right twice a day.
But if it's in the woods, does it still?
All right, 5 things.
Yeah.
This is a theological conversation, by the way. All places in the world are held together by Jesus's presence.
Yep.
Whether we're there or not. So if something makes a noise, the presence of God is there to hear it. So I've just now solved your philosophical dilemma with theology. So,
Boom.
There you go, Descartes. Hey, while you're looking that up, I was going to say
Descartes.
Yeah. Descartes. It is here.
It's
and
here.
I think it's been here for a while. And I think we're just now, it feels like we're just starting to talk about it. But I think but like Christian culture, Christian leaders have been talking about this for a while. And it's been very much on like the fringe, the periphery, you know. But there's a lot of reasons. Like the pandemic has kind of thrust this into a lot of our perspective. And we're also realizing that like because of the pandemic, it's kind of shaken a lot of the other generation's faith as well, in a similar way that Gen Z's faith has been shaken already, pre-pandemic. And so, I'm not going to make like a climate change analogy here, but I think the notion that we're talking about, that you are talking about, is that we're starting to have the conversation. So some people might think like, oh, this is like, I'm not ready to have this conversation. And we're trying to say like, well, we should have been having this conversation like 20 years ago. That's what we should have been doing.
Yeah. There's some denial in there.
Yeah. But it's not too late, I think, because, that's what church and Christianity and being a Christ follower is all about, is like,
it's the Newsroom, one of my all-time favorite shows. It's an Aaron Sorkin thing from HBO. A couple years ago. Jeff Daniels is like the main character. He brings on a climate change person onto his show. You should go Google this clip it's hysterical. And he's like going to be fair with the guy. And he says, okay, tell me about the climate. And he says, well, to be honest with you, it's like already over. And he's like, well, let's be encouraging to people. Like, what can we change? How could we do things? And he goes, well, it's sort of like, I don't know, like if your house is already burned down around you, yeah, there's not really much you can do. And he's like, well, this isn't going to help people. Like, they're not going to have any hope. And he's like, well, I mean, I suppose if you want to know what we could do, like we could go backwards in time about 30 years and do something. But to be honest with you, like this is over. And so it's just this back and forth between this like reporter who's trying to interview this guy. And he's just like so strongly explaining that we're definitely screwed and there's nothing we can do about it. I think there are people like that in church world who've already said like, this is not fixable.
Yeah.
Can't turn this around. Can't reinvent this. Can't reimagine this. We do need to go back that many years to make changes, and it's already done.
And a lot of those voices are using that as sort of like a proof of like the end times are nigh. Like,
yes,
well,
but it's that, but it's also there's a movement of people who are, I think, just were hurt by the church.
Yeah.
And they're just saying like, my experience is common to like everyone now. And it's not like they're wrong. There are like tons of bad churches out there. There are like this movement has been co-opted in many ways. And, but I'm not going to come from the perspective that this can't be fixed or changed or reinvented, because to me, there's always hope. Like I go back to like, sorry to pull the Jesus card and everything, but like he says like, you, Peter, on this rock, I'll build my church and the gates of hell will never overcome it. I'll give you the keys. I'll empower you to do the things that I've called you to do. I just think it takes enough of us, people who are in positions of power within the church, to still continue to persevere, to be honest about what's actually happening, to, hear what people are saying, and then to make the changes necessary. And then we'll see fruit down the road if we do the right things now. And if we are waiting and arguing over where we're at, we're not moving in the right direction yet. Like we all have to agree, this is where we're at. We're in a post-Christian world. Our worldview is going to continue to be less and less adopted by people. The younger and younger you get, the less Christian you get, the more dire the situation. If we don't change, if we don't do things differently, we will not survive. And I don't mean like we'll be extinct, but the church will lose its ability to continue to make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
And it won't die. Jesus guarantees it. But also, like, what are we doing?
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of distractions in there too. I mean, we started this conversation talking about the feigning persecution. Like that's one of the things we get distracted with. Like we spend our time focusing on that, and it's like, oh, maybe we should be talking about Gen Z. Like, or we, a lot of things that we've talked about in all these podcasts and these sermons, we lose our identity because we saddle ourselves with a political ideology. That becomes the thing. Or we become so micro concerned about growth. Like growth is the thing. Like, and that's not the thing. Like these are all distractions from what really is important here. And our rescue mission is to get back to what is.
I think people would be like, well, we can't just change the church every time culture changes. And it's like, actually, that's what we've been doing for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
But it's just happened in 100-year periods or 500-year periods or 50-year periods. And now change is so constant that it's like micro.
It's a lot faster.
Yeah. It's like micro changes on top of us all the time. In fact, another shout out for the leadership thing this weekend. One of the things we're talking about, agile leadership, where, to be honest with you, the only constant thing in our world right now, if you're a leader, is change. Like things change so rapidly.
And not even just in the church, just in life in general. The most constant theme of your life over the last 10 years has probably been change.
Right. Yeah. Things don't hold together very long like they used to. Even a generation, baby boomer generation was like 25, 30 years. Gen X was like 20, 18 years. Millennials are like 15 years. Gen Z is like 5 generations already. Like micro inside of it, they're like 2-3 years apiece. Like it's just changing so rapidly that, so I kind of feel like if we're not paying attention and moving, we almost are already a step or 2 or 3 behind whenever we do make a change. It's like, we should have done that 5 years ago. So I just wanted to point this out. This is a pretty good article from Gospel Coalition. 5 things that just frustrate Gen Z Christians. 1, when partisan politics reshape faith. I think we spent a little time talking about that last week.
In the last 6 months.
I had a conversation with 2 older Gen Zs, kids from my youth group, kids that don't go to our church, but I love dearly, and who are, figuring out their faith and getting connected and trying to figure out what it looks like moving forward. And as we talked through some of the stuff that's gone on, and I was sharing some stories from our church or some stories from other pastors, their response was just disgust, right? Like I mentioned that we talked about race and we lost some people. I mentioned that we lost some people over COVID decisions.
Yep.
I mentioned that my friends, other churches that that I know about, or pastors I know about, where they had some nonsense happen in their church. When I shared the story, they're just disgusted by this kind of stuff. It doesn't even seem like it makes any sense to them, because it feels like that your politics are shaping your faith is backwards to them.
Yep.
Your faith is, or your politics are a secondary issue to your faith to Gen Z. And I think what you have is you have people who make their worldview their politics, and then that is their primary thing. But if you have Christians, in Gen Z, they're generally saying, why are we arguing over stuff that we shouldn't argue over? And why don't we make the gospel the main thing? And so they get frustrated when the church is overly political and or allowing the faith of the church to be shaped by one narrative or the other. And in general, the church has been a little conservative and shaped, I think, more, my experience, more towards the conservative end of the spectrum. And they're just disgusted by it. You know what I mean? They just,
Yep.
that's not gonna reach out to that generation of if they come to a rally for some political leader at their church, right?
Yeah,
they have high levels of respect for people's autonomy. Even when they don't agree with you, Gen Z, they'll be like, cool, that's your thing.
Yep.
Those are your viewpoints. I still respect you as a person and want to have a relationship with you, even if we don't agree.
High value for authenticity.
Yeah. And autonomy, your individual ideas.
Yep.
Yeah, it's not about trying to win someone over to your side. It's about cool, this is who you are and what you believe. I respect that.
Yeah. And I think the woke mob conversations, or the other end of the spectrum, the sort of, the vilification of the woke mob, if we're calling these two people the two extremes of the political climate, in general, there's zero respect for each other's autonomous political beliefs. They vilify each other. And I think Gen Z actually isn't as much part of that conversation as we think they are. The media is actually the one doing that.
Yeah.
And they're acting like there's this group of young people who are just outraged at everybody's thoughts, but they're actually really respectful of each other when they're in relationship of all their whatever they're bringing to the table. And I think a lot of times they will give you more respect if you're if you sort of are able to articulate and defend and talk about why.
Yeah.
Yep.
You've thought this through. You have a viewpoint.
Yeah.
I respect that.
Yep.
Second one, they said when apologetics outweigh relationships, that drives them bananas.
I think we talked about this one maybe 2 episodes ago. The notion that for Gen Z, it's a high desire for relationship and connectedness. And that if someone's trying to convince you of something or prove something to you, this is a generation that has grown up being marketed to their entire lives, and they don't like that. They have a great sensor, meter for it. They can sniff it out and feel it, and they reject it almost wholesale. And so if you're apologetically trying to convince someone why they should be a Christ follower, have faith that is Gen Z with proofs, it's not going to work. It's going to backfire. You can be saying the absolute perfect things that are truthful, biblical, knowledgeable, wise. It most likely will backfire because that's not the language they speak. They reject those things almost wholesale. So
yeah, they want to show up to a church where they see people are accepted into that church that are trying to think of the right words to use here. I feel like they think there are certain people that wouldn't be accepted into a church, and when they show up at one that has a breadth of people that are loved and cared for, even that probably wouldn't fit at some other churches. That's like a major plus to them, because they look at it and they go, that person would have been kicked out of my last church, but they're here. And so this place values relationships.
Yep. They want to see that
Right.
on display, that relationships are important and that community is important.
Yeah. Like that's their main motivating. It's like their main source of motivation. I'd say like baby boomers' main source of motivation was like truth at all costs.
Yep.
And Gen Z, and of course this kind of cascades down as you get younger. Gen Z is going, relationships are our main thing. Like we want to see people accepted, loved, part of the community. Like this goes to like they grew up without, like no bullying. Our entire school is going to band together to make sure that everyone fits. That we're going to have our, even our special needs kids integrated into our classrooms. We're the most multicultural generation that's ever existed. Like
most socially aware generation.
So there's like, they are already sort of unifying and wanting everyone to have a place and wanting everyone to belong, and relationship is what drives them.
Yep.
So when they show up at a place and somebody goes, let's divide ourselves based on our theological viewpoints. You guys go over there. You guys go over there. You guys just get out. They go, this is not our thing.
Yeah.
So third one, when Christians don't live what they believe.
I don't think we've talked about this at all.
I mean, authentic is their main thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Like if can't trust you, if you're not actually just being authentic in who you are, then this is not going to work.
Yep.
They have very honed in BS meters. And as soon as they see it, they're done. They're out.
Yep.
And so much so, I think this kind of gets to like, in some ways, cancel culture. Like if you look at cancel culture and kind of dig deep, it gets to this root of like, you were pretending you were this way, but you were actually this way.
Right.
So we want to cancel the fake you and make sure everyone remembers.
Like, you don't get a platform anymore.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's funny is that the people who can't get canceled are the most authentic people.
Yeah.
Even if they're crazy. Like you have people double down on their what's getting them canceled, and it ends up working so that they don't get canceled. Like the authenticity gets them through that woke mob mentality.
Yeah.
It's funny. You see people like, I mean, I'll just throw out like a Joe Rogan or like a, even Dave Chappelle right now is going through this kind of stuff. Like, and if you don't know who those people are, that's fine. Don't go look them up. It's fine. You don't have to know who they are. But like, they're not getting canceled because they're just leaning even more into authenticity, whether you agree with them or not. Right.
Yeah.
Like whether you agree, like they're just going, well, this is who I am. Like I am this person. So if you want to vilify me, go ahead. I don't care. And I think there's like enough young people who are like, well, that guy's authentic. Like, I'm okay with him. He doesn't need to be canceled.
Yeah.
It's funny that that's actually like what gets you through some of these moments. It's the people that they find out that are gaming the system, and trying to, I don't know, preach one thing and do another.
Yeah.
And of course it's applied, not fairly across different groups of people.
True. But if you just apply it to that, the heading, like Christians, hypocrisy is a big issue. And it's something that I think everyone has done or is doing in a variety of ways, because we're not perfect and we never will be. But it gets more to the heart of, if you're saying this, your actions need to live up to the words or the things that you're saying.
Right.
And if they don't, then why should I listen to anything else or do anything else that you're saying? I reject that. And so,
they grew up with so much access to information that it was it no longer carried weight to say something and be like, well, you should believe me just because I said so.
Yeah.
Like they respond with, well, prove it.
Right.
Either show me where you got that or show me how you're living that out. Like, you have to prove it. You can't just say it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I feel like they sniff it out, they call it out, and you lose trust.
Yep.
And that's how it works.
Yep.
And they don't care if you're cool. just want you to be real.
Yep.
So we've been preaching that for a long time. It was one of our youth ministry values.
Yep.
Is be real. So Aaron's telling me that we need to wrap it up. So I'll do number 4 here. When Christians are known more for judgment than love. And I believe this too. Like when Christians are known more for what they're against and what they're for.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
It's rough.
Yep. I mean, we could probably spend multiple episodes just on this notion that
we could.
It seems so simple and foundational and just basic. The idea of put all of your debates about, theology and what the church should or shouldn't be on the shelf, and you just look at Jesus and what he did and what he said, the themes. Jesus embodied love and grace in everything he did, which means there really isn't much room for judgment at all. And yet this is where we spend so much time being stuck, and it's not always in like big ways. It's like we get stuck as churches judging other Christians within the church because they might see something slightly different than we do, or it's just about love and grace, people.
They will know us by our love
for one another.
How we love each other.
Don't get it mixed up.
How we love each other.
Our love for pets.
No. Well, no, that one another phrase literally means you'll know you by the way that you love the other people in your church. Like it doesn't even mean people outside the church. And the one another is a phrase that we use when we're talking about how we treat each other in the church. People outside of the church will see how we treat each other and be like, got to be part of that. And it's a weird look. There is a line. There is a tough conversation to be had. I was like thinking about this, the Matthew 18 sort of stuff about calling people on their sin and challenging them. And it's like, we always often say like, this is an imperfect church for imperfect people, but like, we also don't want to let people use that imperfect person concept to allow them to stay in sin and to not change and be transformed by the Holy Spirit. Like the process of being regenerated, changed by the Holy Spirit is a lifelong process that we need to continue to go through. But I think the key piece of it would be like, be authentic in that. Like, don't pretend that you're better than you are. Don't hold people to a standard that you yourself aren't holding yourself to. And then also be willing to help other people out of the stuff that they're struggling with in relationship, right? Not like judgmental as in like you are doing it all wrong, but as in, hey, let me help you pick some of this up. Let me hold you accountable. I want the best for you. Right. And that's when that stuff starts to really transform people. It's not about judgment. We're not the ones that get to judge anything. We should be judging ourselves harshly, and we should be judging other people with grace, but we should also be encouraging other people to be transformed.
Exactly.
And that's the really hard part, because you're like, I was actually having a conversation with somebody a couple weeks ago, and I was like, listen, you know the answer to this problem. What you're doing is not pleasing God, and you're making a big mistake. I was having like a real conversation with somebody and they're like, I feel like you're judging me right now. And I was like, I want the best for you. I'm giving you godly advice that you're doing something that is going to really hurt your life. Like, don't go in this direction. Do what God has called you to do. And there's a fine line between.
There is. I mean, the opposite of judgment is not like passivity. It's love. So that doesn't mean like when we think of love, we do a disservice if we just think it's like squishy and warm and like gentle. It can be rough at times. Like it can be loving can mean being very clear and very abrupt and like pointing things out that are not fun and easy. Like, but it gets to like, I mean, keep using heart. Like maybe I should say the core of what we're trying to accomplish here. You can do that in love, and it's not passive or just letting someone do whatever they want. Right. Like that passage and this notion is not just about giving people a blank check to do whatever they want, because that's the opposite of love. That's
right. Yeah. That's generally would be taking advantage of people or would be selfish. Yeah. Right. That sort of like idea.
Loving can be accepting, and loving can be permissive of certain things, but it's not, if I love you and you're doing something wrong, that means I'm going to talk to you about it. I'm not just going to ignore it.
It also means being honest.
Yeah.
And honesty is not always the easiest thing.
No.
It does not always feel good.
No. And the last one was when Christians aren't serious thinkers. And and I love this one. I think is really funny because this is like a TikTok thing. You jump on TikTok and you looking for like spiritual, like people who are talking about the Bible or talking about whatever. A lot of times there'll be like people who walked away from church or had an issue with church, and they'll be like explaining to you like a Bible story. And it's hysterical when you listen to them because like they're just processing it through their own lens. They don't understand kind of the nuances of scripture or kind of how things are written. And so they're like bringing up really realistic points that need to be overcome by like serious thinkers. Like, and when you start to have the conversation, it goes way downhill real fast. It's like, well, you don't know anything about blah, blah, blah. I think we get defensive, but honestly, I think they just want to be a people, you know, Gen Z wants to be engaged in a way that seems like fair and real. Like if we're going to defend scripture, we should be able to explain why this genocide happened and why this difficult passage is in there and why, you know, and of course we want to go back to Jesus and really focus in on all his like teachings and, you know, start in that place. Cause I think that is probably the place where I think most people will find traction. But we better be able to have real conversations. I think there's a lot of people that just grew up in church. They just grew up like with the stuff given to them. And they go, yeah, I'm swallowing it all. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, it ties back to the desire to prove it. Like, tell me why. Give me a why. Show me why. Don't just expect me to jump on board because you said the Bible said so.
Right. Yeah. The Bible said so does not work.
Yeah. No.
There's no authority there anymore.
It's like a watchword for them, and they're like half out the door already.
Gen Z, as we've talked about multiple times during this podcast, they crave authenticity, and authenticity requires awareness, and awareness essentially is knowledge of self, you know? And so if you're not critically thinking about who you are and what you believe and why, but not doing that like in an oppressive, like I'm trying to convince you to be like me way, then they don't have time for that. You know, they don't want propaganda. They want people who think and know why they are who they are.
They're not content to just float along.
No.
Like they want to be engaged in their life.
Yeah. I think if you can't say, I have really thought long and hard about this problem and overcome it in my own thinking, like, why do bad things happen to people? You know, good people. Why, you know, why is there acts of genocide in the Old Testament? Why, like, if you haven't considered those things and you haven't thought through them all, and then someone asks you that question and you're like, I don't know, like, because it's the Bible and I believe it, then they're like, cool. Not interested in that.
Right. Well, and you've lost
I gotta go.
credibility with them. If you haven't spent the time digging through those things on your own.
Right.
Yeah. If you want to engage with those people, then you have to have a level of respect for their thoughts and knowledge, and then understand that they want you to display that to them too. Like it's not transactional, it's mutual respect in that sense. So yeah. Well, guys, thanks for tuning in today. Fun conversation as always, and we will be back next week. Just a reminder that if you guys have any questions about this conversation, these topics, or any of our previous podcasts, be sure to either drop those in the comments section on here, or you can always send those to our office email, which is office@pursuitcommunity.church.
We have a text-in number too. If you guys want to text our office number, it's 612-688-9575. So shoot us a text and let us know that you were listening.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't believe you knew the office number off the top of your head.
I have it pulled up on my computer in front of me.
I literally don't know what it is.
I totally knew that number too.
I mean, yeah, of course I knew it.
We've talked long and hard about not having a phone. That's the world we live in now.
All right. You guys are great. We're out of here.
Love you guys.
Day.
See ya.